The first thing Riley noticed was the hum. Not the sharp beeping of monitors or the soft hiss of oxygen, but the deep, steady vibration of machines working somewhere out of sight. St. Gabriel Medical Center never really slept, not even at 5:50 in the morning. It only dropped its voice. Fluorescent lights washed the corridor in a tired green. Floor wax and chlorine fought with the smell of coffee that had been burnt 2 hours too long. Riley Kane walked down the ICU hallway with a paper cup in one hand and a half-dead pen stuck behind her ear. Her scrub top was wrinkled, the navy fabric darkened at the collar, where sweat had dried and then come back again. Her feet ached in a way that felt ancient. 8 straight hours of moving. 8 straight hours of not having the luxury to sit with how tired she really was. She paused at the nurse's station to sign off a medication check, fingers cramping around the pen. Someone had taped a sticky note to the monitor. "Smile, it could be worse." Riley read it, then glanced at the reflection of her own face in the black screen beneath it. Hollow eyes, ponytail half fallen out, a faint line between her brows that had not been there 5 years ago. She did not smile. From somewhere outside, faint and far, a helicopter cut across the sky. The low mechanical chops slid through the glass and across the tiles. Every muscle in Riley's neck tightened. Her hand stopped moving on the paper. She listened, counting beats under her breath. Not that old pattern, civilian medevac. Different blades, different rhythm. Still, it took her a few breaths to remember how to breathe like this was Baltimore and not somewhere else entirely. "Riley, you heading out on time for once?" Maria, one of the night nurses, asked as she hurried past with a tray of meds. "That was the plan," Riley said. "Good. You look like death, and not the coded kind." Riley huffed something close to a laugh and kept walking. She was 20 steps from the break room when the overhead speaker crackled. "Code Blue, Emergency Department. Code Blue, Emergency Department." The words were calm. The way a flight attendant's voice is calm right before turbulence. The way people sound when they are not the ones who might die. Riley dropped her empty cup into the nearest trash can and pivoted toward the elevator without thinking. The doors slid open as she arrived. 2 residents squeezed in beside her, one of them still tucking his shirt into his pants. "You on this one, Kane?" the taller one asked. "For now," she said. The elevator doors opened onto the chaos of the emergency department. Bright lights, voices layered over each other, the crisp staccato of orders being shouted and repeated. A gurney burst through the ambulance bay doors, pushed by 2 paramedics who looked like they had already done this too many times tonight. "Female 57 crushing chest pain onset 30 minutes ago," one of them called. Blood pressure tanked in the rig, sats dropping unresponsive to nitro. Riley stepped in at the head of the bed, hands already on the rails, moving with the team. The woman's skin had the wrong color, that grayish tint that said the body had decided it was done cooperating. Her eyes were open but unfocused mouth working soundlessly. "Name?" Riley asked, even though she knew the woman might not answer. "Mrs. Haley Novak," the paramedic said. "Husband is parking the car." Riley looked at the monitor. Heart rate high, blood pressure low. She moved her hand to the woman's neck, fingers pressing lightly. Eyes flicking to the jugular vein that stood out under skin slick with sweat. "Get cardiology down here," someone said. "Page low. Tell him it's urgent." "Another EKG," someone else added. "We need to rule out dissection." Riley tuned the noise down the way she always did. She listened to the wet rattle in the woman's breathing, felt the faint, fluttery thump under her fingertips. The vein at the side of the neck pulsed, distended like a rope pulled too tight. The skin over the sternum looked full in a way that had nothing to do with muscle or fat. Tamponed, her mind said. Fluid where it should not be. Heart wrapped too tight. She had seen it in other places under other lights, with sand sticking to the sweat on her hands instead of latex. "Where's Lowe?" she asked. "On his way," a resident replied. "He wants a better echo before anything invasive." Riley glanced at the ultrasound card, its screen frozen on a grainy image that meant almost nothing at this angle. The fellow holding the probe adjusted, frowned, adjusted again. "Our window is trash," he muttered. "Just give me a second." The monitor shrieked as the blood pressure dipped lower. The woman's fingers twitched once, then lay still. Riley felt the air in the room change the way it always did right before a line on the monitor went flat. Sound seemed to stretch. Her own heartbeat thudded in her ears, out of sync with the machines. "She does not have a second," Riley said. The crash cart sat 3 feet away, stalked by nurses who knew how she liked it. She reached for it, opening the top drawer without looking, hand-finding the kit she wanted by touch. Needle, syringe, guide. Whoa, Kane, what are you doing?" The fellow's voice went up half an octave. Riley swabbed the woman's chest fast but thorough, her movements economical, practiced. The scent of betadine rose sharp and chemical. "Pericardiocentesis," she said. "She's tamponating." "We do not have proper imaging," he protested. We do not have attending clearance. We could hit the myocardium. We could puncture a lung. We wait for low. Riley felt for the space between the ribs, counting in her head, mapping a three-dimensional structure she knew better than the back of her own hand. Her fingers sank into the familiar groove. If we wait, she said, we will be coding her. Riley, do not touch that needle. The fellow reached for her wrist. She moved her elbow just enough that his fingers slid off her sleeve instead of her skin. Her eyes did not leave the spot she had chosen. Somebody document time, she said. 12 lead is on. Everyone sees her pressure. Everyone sees her neck. The room seemed to hold its breath with her as she angled the needle and pushed. A whisper of resistance, then a subtle give. Her hand steadied even as sweat prickled at the back of her neck. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then dark blood surged into the syringe, thick and heavy, almost black. The monitor's frantic beeping shifted, slowing, smoothing out into something closer to rhythm. Pressure climbing, someone said, disbelief threaded through the words. The woman's chest rose deeper. Her eyes, which had been staring at the ceiling, flicked toward Riley's face. She did not speak. She did not have to. Her gaze locked on Riley as if that was the only solid thing in the room. You're okay, Riley murmured, keeping the needle steady. Stay with me, Mrs. Novak. By the time Dr. Kieran Lowe strode through the curtain, the worst of it was over. He took in the scene with a single sweeping look. The needle in the woman's chest. The blood-filled syringe. Riley's gloved hand exactly where it had to be. What is happening here? His tone was cool, each word clipped. She was tamponating, Riley said. There was no time for a full echo. You performed a blind pericardiocentesis in my department without my authorization, Lowe said. Do you have any idea what kind of risk that is? The risk, Riley replied, was letting her die while we argued. His jaw shifted once a tiny movement, then he looked away from her and toward the resident. Document everything, he said, and paged Director Holt. The walk to Holt's office felt longer than usual. The administrative wing of St. Gabriel existed in a different climate from the rest of the hospital. The air smelled less like antiseptic and more like carpet cleaner. The floor here was carpeted, not tile, swallowing the sound of her shoes. Holt's assistant opened the door without knocking. Inside sunlight spilled through wall-length windows, catching on the glass awards lined up along a shelf. Framed mission statements hung between them in tasteful blue. Director Leonard Holt sat behind a wide desk that might have cost more than Riley's car. His white shirt was crisp. His tie navy with small silver dots was perfectly centered. Ms. Kane, he said, folding his hands, sit. She stayed standing. He let the silence stretch for a few seconds, waiting to see if she would fill it. When she did not, he opened a folder with her name on the tab. You have been here 3 years, he said. In that time, your clinical outcomes are excellent. Mortality numbers lower than average response times impressive. He flipped a page. At the same time, you have accumulated more incident reports than any nurse in your unit. Deviation from protocol, questioning physician orders, independent interventions. Riley kept her eyes on him, not on the papers. This morning, Holt went on, you performed an invasive procedure without an attending present, without complete imaging, and without authorization. Do you dispute that? The patient lived, Riley said. This is not about outcome, Holt replied. This is about process. We are not a forward operating base. We are a civilian hospital in a litigious city. Our duty is to provide safe evidence-based care. She thought of Mrs. Novak's eyes finding hers the way her fingers had tightened briefly around Riley's wrist. Safe had not been what that woman needed. She had needed someone who could not tolerate standing still. Holt tapped the folder with one manicured finger. I cannot have staff who believe their instincts place them above institutional protocol, he said. It exposes this hospital to unacceptable liability, and it creates a culture where rules become optional. He slid a sheet of paper free from the stack and turned it so the printed side faced her. This is a resignation letter, he added. He said. Effective immediately, you may sign it and we will record your departure as voluntary. You will receive 2 weeks of severance, or we can proceed with termination for cause, which will be reflected in any reference we are asked to provide. Riley looked down at the clean black letters spelling out her name. She could argue. She could talk about triage in places where there were no lawyers. She could describe what a heart felt like under her palms when it was about to stop. Instead, she picked up the pen. Her signature came out steady. When she pushed the paper back toward him, she said only, I want one last round. Holt frowned as if the request did not fit in the space they were occupying. One last what? Round, Riley repeated. I want to see my patients before I hand off. No orders, just goodbyes. He hesitated. There was nothing in the policy manual about this. You will be escorted by security, he said finally. Fine. The security officer waiting outside was younger than Riley by at least 10 years. His badge read J. Ruiz. He fell into step a few paces behind her as she left the administrative corridor and stepped back onto tile. The air changed again sharper, full of bleach and human breath. "Sorry about all this," Ruiz said quietly. "They said I have to, walk along." "You are not the one firing me," Riley said. He gave a small, awkward chuckle. "Nurses on night say you are the one they call when things go sideways." "Sideways is where the work is," she said. She moved from room to room, checking monitors out of habit, even though they were no longer officially hers. In 412, Mr. Cho dozed in his recliner chair, oxygen cannula in place, soap opera flickering silently on the mounted television. She wrote on a sticky note and left it on the chart. "Explain every step before you touch him. He wakes up scared." In 417, Ms. Patel grimaced in her sleep, half turned on her side. Riley thumbed through the medication record and left another note. "Pain meds 20 min before PT. She fights if it hurts." Small things, not clinically important in the way Holt's graphs would track, but real. By the time she returned to the nurse's station, her pockets were empty of sticky notes. Maria looked up from the computer, worry etched across her features. "Is it true?" Maria asked. "Looks that way," Riley said. "You saved that woman. Sometimes that's not the metric that counts." Riley set her stethoscope on the counter, letting the coiled tubing rest there for someone else to claim. For a moment, she watched her own hand lie still on the scratched laminate surface, the same hand that had gone exactly where it needed to go in a chest, not even an hour ago. Then she pulled her locker key from her pocket. "I have to clear out my stuff," she said. Ruiz nodded and followed as she headed down the stairwell toward the staff changing room, the stairwell door swinging and shut behind them with a hollow metal sound. The staff changing room was cooler than the hall air conditioning, blowing stronger in a place no one visited unless they were arriving or leaving. Metal lockers lined the walls, their paint chipped at the corners, stickers half peeled from old shifts and old jokes. Riley walked to her locker on autopilot. Third row 5 from the end. She spun the combination, listening for the tiny clicks of the tumblers, then pulled. The door stuck for a second before it gave way with a metallic creak. Inside, her life compressed into a narrow metal box. Her stethoscope hung from a hook, the tubing coiled on itself, the bell engraved Arcane, RN. 3 pens sat in an old coffee mug, one with teeth marks on the cap, a travel-sized bottle of lotion, cherry blossom scent, nearly empty, a pair of running shoes she kept swearing she would use on lunch breaks that never happened. Taped to the inside of the door, a photograph. A boy about 17, hair sticking out from under a baseball cap, eyes caught mid-laugh. One arm thrown around someone standing just out of frame. The background showed bleachers bright under summer sun. The glossy surface had a small crack running through the corner from being bent one too many times. Riley reached up fingertips, brushing the tape. For a second, she did not move. Her hand rested on the cool metal, the photograph beneath it. Ruiz cleared his throat softly. "You want me to wait outside?" he asked. "It is fine," she said. She peeled the photo away carefully, working the tape loose so the edges did not tear. She slid it into the pocket of her scrub pants, the fabric still faintly damp from a spill earlier in the night that she had never gotten around to changing out of. The rest went into a canvas duffel. Stethoscope, shoes, the lotion she never used. She hesitated over the mug, then put that in too. The locker looked wrong, empty, a bare rectangle of dull gray. When she closed the door this time, it did not creak. It clicked shut, final and neat. On the far wall, a small laminated sign read "Staff Lounge," with an arrow pointing down the hall. She found herself walking toward it without really deciding to. Ruiz followed his radio clipped to his belt antenna, brushing his hip. The lounge was half lit, only the fixtures over the counter turned on. A coffee maker gurgled to itself, working on a fresh pot. The smell was strong, bitter. Vending machines hummed their glass fronts, reflecting the room in crooked rectangles. Against the back wall, between 2 recycling bins, hung a wooden frame the size of a whiteboard. At first glance, it looked like a corkboard. When Riley stepped closer, she saw the brass plate at the bottom. In memoriam St. Gabriel's staff who gave their lives in service. Photos filled the space, arranged in rows. Some were formal headshots in white coats. Some were candid shots cropped from group pictures, laughter frozen mid-sound. Under each one, a small line of text with a name and a date. Riley scanned the first row. A respiratory therapist who had caught an infection during the early days of a viral outbreak. A paramedic killed when his rig was hit by a drunk driver. A surgeon who had died in a winter pileup on the interstate on his way in for an emergency call. Her eyes moved almost out of habit down the column. The 4th photo in the 2nd row stopped her. The uniform in that picture was not a lab coat. Captain Aisha Noor, MD, U.S. Army Medical Corps, KIA Helmand Province, Operation Glass Light. Aisha looked out of the frame in full dress blues, dark hair tucked under her cover, that same open smile Riley remembered. Confident. Certain. Like someone who could walk into any room and make it make sense. The word at the end of the line pulled at Riley's chest harder than any sound. Glasslight. Her throat went dry. The operation was not supposed to have a name on anything. In every official document Riley had signed, it was a date and a code, never that word. Briefings had started with reminders about classification. Reports had referenced it in coy circumlocutions that said nothing at all. Yet here it was, printed cleanly on a metal plate in a staff lounge in Baltimore at eye level where anyone refilling a coffee cup could read it. Riley stepped closer until the toes of her shoes nearly touched the wall. The air felt colder here, though she knew that was not possible. Her hand lifted before she meant it to. The tips of her fingers rested on the glass over Aisha's face. The reflection in the glass showed her own features superimposed on her former commanding officer. Pale scrubs, shadowed eyes, skin drawn tight around the mouth. For a moment she saw both faces at once, one layered over the other. "Hey," Ruiz said quietly from behind her. "You knew her." Riley let her hand drop. "Something like that," she said. Ruiz took a step closer, reading the plate. "That is wild," he murmured. "I did not know they put military folks up there, too." She doubted anyone had asked. Someone had just done it. Someone had picked that particular photo. Someone had written that particular word. Riley turned away from the wall. Behind her, the coffee maker beeped, announcing its fresh brew. The sound snapped the room back into something ordinary. "Ms. Kane," Ruiz said, "we should probably, head to the front. They will want your badge." He sounded apologetic, as if he wanted to take the sting out of a process that had no soft edges. Riley nodded and walked toward the door. Her palm met the push bar. For a second, she felt the cool metal under her skin and the weight of the building pressing around them. Then she pushed. The door swung open and the hum of the hospital rolled back in. They had gone about 10 steps up the hall when she heard it. At first, it was a low murmur under the usual noise. Ventilation systems, rolling carts, distant monitors. Then it grew a deep vibration that seemed to come from the floor itself through the bones of the building and up into her shoes. The hairs on her arms stood up. A junior nurse coming around the corner stopped laughing nervously. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "What is that, construction?" Riley knew that sound. Not this building's HVAC, not a train. The pitch climbed layered with a rhythmic chop that her body recognized on a level that had nothing to do with Baltimore. The rumble sank into her teeth, made the ceiling tiles tremble. Fluorescent fixtures buzzed harder. A metal cart rattled against the wall. Then the overhead lights flickered. 1 beat. 2. The emergency strips along the baseboards blinked on faint red. The overhead speaker clicked. "All staff, please remain in place and await further instructions," the recorded voice said. "Do not attempt to leave the building. This is not a drill." The words landed with more weight than usual. The nurse who had joked about construction stopped laughing. Riley moved toward a window at the end of the hall, drawn there along with half a dozen others. Through the glass over the concrete courtyard and the parking deck, she saw the helipad on the hospital roof. 2 helicopters were settling onto the painted cross rotor wash, whipping trash and loose paper into spirals. They were not the white and red birds of civilian medevac. These were low and heavy bodies, matte and dark markings subdued. Helicopter blades blurred the air, chopping a pattern that was too familiar. They came down fast, assertive the way you did when you did not plan to ask permission to be there. Behind her, someone whispered, "National Guard." Another voice answered, "I have never seen them send that for a hospital." The speaker crackled again, but this time the voice was different. Male, even enough of an edge of command that anyone who had ever spent time around a base would recognize the cadence. "This is a controlled security operation," the voice said. "All clinical staff remain with your patients. All visitors stay in your current locations. Riley Kane, report to rooftop access immediately. Riley Kane, rooftop access now." The hallway stilled. Conversations cut off mid-syllable. Heads turned as if pulled on strings. Several nurses looked at Riley and then away, eyes flickering between curiosity and something like fear. Ruiz shifted his weight hand, going toward his radio before he caught himself. "For real," he muttered more to himself than to her. Riley felt her bag slide a few inches down her shoulder. The strap bit into her collarbone. The air seemed thicker, harder to pull into her lungs. She held onto the strap for exactly 1 breath, then let it drop. The duffel thumped softly against the floor. "Ms. Kane," Ruiz started. The stairwell door at the far end of the corridor slammed open. It hit the stopper with a bang that echoed down the hall. 6 soldiers poured through boots, hitting tile in a tight rhythm. Their uniforms were darker than standard issue gear, streamlined. Helmets, vests, rifles slung with practiced ease. They spread out without speaking, eyes scanning faces, hands close to their weapons, but not on the triggers. The patch on their shoulders caught the fluorescent light as they turned. A stylized wraith in motion, a suggestion of a skull hidden in his hood, 7 small stars arched over it. Ghost Lance Sevet. Riley's pulse jumped so hard she felt it in her fingertips. The tallest soldier, the one who had been first through the door, swept his gaze across the hall and stopped when he reached her. His eyes stayed on her a beat longer than any of the others. It was not the look of someone trying to guess. It was the look of someone who had been given a description that did not rely on hair color or height. He walked toward her with purpose, the others adjusting their spacing almost imperceptibly to give him a clear path. Conversations died in whatever corners of the hallway they had tried to survive in. He stopped a few feet in front of her. Up close, Riley could see the fine dust still clinging to his boots, the faint white lines on his knuckles, the way his gaze kept moving even while he spoke, cataloging exits angles people. "Ms. Kane," he said. His voice was steady-pitched low enough that it did not carry far, but everyone nearby heard it anyway. "Sergeant Mason Cole, United States Army. We need you to come with us to the roof." Ruiz shifted again, torn between his job and whatever this was. "Is she in some kind of trouble?" he asked. Cole glanced at him for half a second, then back at Riley. "No, sir," Cole said. "She's in some kind of necessity." Riley looked past his shoulder to the window. The rotors on the roof were still turning their rotation, slowing, but not slowing enough. Air shimmered around them, churning. Her hands were empty. Her locker was clean. Her badge still hung from her scrub top, the plastic card warm against her chest. She reached up and closed her fingers around it. "All right," she said. Cole nodded once, a crisp, contained movement, then stepped to the side, opening a space for her between him and another soldier. As she fell into step, the small group shifted, closing around her in a formation that did not quite feel like an escort, and did not quite feel like a guard. They headed for the stairwell door, the noise of their boots echoing ahead of them, Riley walking into the hollow the soldiers left in their wake. The stairwell smelled like old paint and hot dust. The soldiers moved as if they had rehearsed this very stairwell, each turn taken at the exact same pace, boots ringing on concrete. Riley kept her hand on the rail to steady herself against the vibration that filtered down from above. As they climbed, the sound of the rotors grew sharper, less a distant murmur and more a physical presence. It pushed at her chest, pressed against her eardrums. The air near the top of the stairs felt warmer, tinged with exhaust. On the last landing, Cole stopped and pushed open the metal door with his shoulder. Wind knifed in hot and gritty, carrying the smell of jet fuel and the city below. The roof was all bright light and motion orange cones tipping over in the wash, a medevac crew flattened against the far wall to stay clear. 2 aircraft sat on the helipad, throwing up their own weather bodies painted in non-reflective dark gray. Their rotors were still spinning blades, slicing the air. The noise swallowed any thought that did not cling hard. Cole leaned close so she could hear him. "Stay with me," he said. He guided her toward the nearer helicopter. A crew chief in a helmet and goggles waited by the open side door, one hand gripping a strap, the other reaching for Riley's elbow as the rotor wash shoved at her. She grabbed the offered wrist and used it to haul herself inside. The transition from open glare to the dim belly of the Black Hawk left her blinking. The space felt narrower than she remembered aircraft feeling, filled with bolted-down jump seats and black netting. The crew chief shoved a headset into her hands and pointed to a seat. She slid onto the canvas and fumbled the ear cups over her head. The roar of the blades dulled, replaced by a more contained mechanical thunder. Cole buckled himself in across from her. 2 younger soldiers took seats to her left and right, their knees almost touching hers. Her duffel bag lay at her feet, the strap looped around her boot. A voice crackled in her ears, the pilot talking to someone outside. There was a gesture from the crew chief, a thumbs up from the cockpit. The helicopter lifted, and Riley's stomach lagged behind for a second as the world dropped out from under them. Baltimore shrank through the open-door hospital roof, sliding away city blocks, tilting as they banked. The early light painted everything in thin gold, but underneath it, she saw shadows. Cole tapped at a tablet strapped to his vest, then tilted the screen toward her. "Colonel Ethan Maddox," he said. "You remember him." The name broke through the noise in her head like a clean note. On the screen, a photograph showed a man in his 40s, dark hair flecked with gray uniform, pressed expression serious but not unkind. Below that image, scans, numbers, and notes scrolled. She felt her mouth go dry. "I remember," she said. Cole pointed at an image that looked like someone had taken a picture through the fog and then traced lines over it for clarity. A shard of metal glowed as a white sliver against the gray of tissue. "Shrapnel is here, Shell," he explained. "It moved. We cannot get at it with standard approach without shredding the heart. We cannot leave it where it is. Field medics have run through the protocol. He is still bleeding into the pericardial sac, still unstable. 6 hours, give or take." 6 hours. It sounded like plenty and not at all. Riley stared at the scan and saw something else. A cramped concrete room with broken tiles. sand blowing in through a cracked doorway. A man on the floor with his hands pressed to his chest and red seeping between his fingers. Helmand had smelled different from Baltimore. Dust there had its own taste, metallic and fine enough to coat every surface. When she closed her eyes now, it came back too easily. It had been afternoon when everything exploded. They had moved into the village at a walk, helmets feeling too heavy, body armor holding in the heat. Aisha walked, point rifle slung but hands-free, talking quietly through the radio. Maddox had stayed near the center of their small column, had bent over a map folded in his pocket. The first blast came from ahead of them, a concussive punch that buckled the doors of the building on their left. The floor jumped under Riley's boots. A second explosion followed 2 heartbeats later, this one closer, the air slamming into her chest like a wall. She remembered the way her ears had gone silent. All sound sucked out, world reduced to light and motion. Her body had hit the ground without her quite deciding to fall. Dust rose in a thick curtain. By the time her hearing snapped back in, it returned all at once. Shouting, gunfire, the high, thin whine of someone screaming without breath. She pushed herself up. Rocks and debris slid under her palms. Her vision tunneled and widened in waves. Maddox lay a few meters away on his back, one leg twisted wrong. His chest rig was torn open. Blood spread beneath him, soaking into the sand so quickly it turned into a dark halo. Riley crawled to him. Her knees left tracks in the dust. "Talk to me," she said, her own voice strange in her ears. His lips moved. "Not ideal," he managed. His breathing came in short, painful pulls. Blood bubbled from the corner of his mouth, bright against the dust on his skin. She ripped open his shirt. The wound sat high on the left side, angry and raw. Every breath made fluid shift under her fingers. His pulse thudded under the heel of her hand, uneven too fast. "Pulmonary, maybe pericardial," she muttered, mind racing through anatomy, through the limited contents of the trauma bag at her knee. We do not have time. The radio crackled with voices she could not answer. Someone shouted that evac was 15 minutes out. Another voice said the route was not secure. Aisha appeared at her shoulder, face-streaked, helmet slightly askew. "They are setting up the landing zone by the canal," Aisha said. Her eyes flicked over Maddox. "Can you keep him alive until they get here?" Riley saw the calculation in those eyes, the weight of command. "If I wait," Riley answered, "I will lose him before the birds even lift." Her fingers closed around the handle of the chest tube kit. It was not meant for this exact angle or this exact wound. There was no imaging. There was only the tactile map of Maddox's ribs and the sound of his heart struggling under fluid. "You are improvising something," Aisha said. "Yes." Aisha hesitated half a second. Then she nodded once. "Do it," she said. "I will keep them off you." Riley worked with tools that were almost right. She opened a path into the chest cavity and felt the rush as blood escaped a space it never should have filled. She used a cauterizing device designed for sealing equipment rather than tissue modulating its heat by instinct and smell. Maddox cursed once long and low, then latched his eyes onto her face, as if looking anywhere else might let him slip away. "Stay with me," she said, voice steady, even as her hands shook from exertion. "I do not feel like explaining this to your replacement." His laugh came out as a rough exhale, but his vitals eased. Numbers on the portable monitor ticked toward ranges where they could breathe. Evac finally arrived. Aisha squeezed Riley's shoulder hard enough to leave bruises before moving to help carry others. Later, when they reached the larger base, Riley wrote her report. She described every step, the thought process, the improvisation. She noted how the technique could be refined for future use. She believed that was what you did. You learned, then you taught. Then the report vanished. First it was delayed, then it was under review. Then, when she asked, she was told it had been incorporated into a larger document she was not cleared to see. The words Glasslight and Hellman stopped appearing in open conversation. Debriefs were closed door short and strangely empty of detail. A colonel she had never met before called her into an office with no windows and thanked her for her service in a tone that felt formal. He slid a stack of papers across the table. Non-disclosure agreements, separation forms. "You have a promising future in civilian medicine," he said. "We are giving you an honorable discharge and a clean record. That is a gift, Specialist Kane." It had not felt like a gift. In the months that followed, she heard rumors. A new protocol circulating in certain units. A set of steps that sounded like what she had done in that dusty building, but with a different name. Maddox procedure. GL7 protocol. No mention of her. The tablet in her hands now showed another number, a casualty count, but in reverse. Lives saved using the technique, lives that had walked away because something she had done in desperation had turned into doctrine. Cole watched her face. "They have been training us on what you did there for years," he said through the headset. "Nobody told us your name. The file lists it as developed by Colonel Maddox and a joint surgical team." Riley swallowed hard. "Of course it does," she said. "He fought it," Cole added. "From what I heard, pushed up the chain, tried to get your credit back. People did not want to open that box." She turned from the tablet to the open door. The city below had given way to patches of forest and fields. Clouds slid by their shadows, moving over the ground like slow waves. "Why now?" she asked. Cole shifted the nylon straps of his harness, creaking softly. "Because the last time he took that kind of hit, and everyone said there was no way to fix it, you proved them wrong," Cole said. "And now he is in a place where proving them wrong again is the only option left." She let that sit in her chest for a moment. At her feet, the duffel bag pressed against her boot. Inside, the stethoscope with her name on it rested against a pair of shoes that had never touched a running track. The helicopter flew for a long time. The noise settled into something almost hypnotic. Occasionally, a voice would crackle in her ears with updates she did not fully register. Her world had shrunk to the rectangle of the tablet, the hum in her bones and the image in her mind of a man on a table somewhere waiting for her. When the aircraft finally began to descend, the shift in gravity brought her awareness back to the cabin. Cole checked his gear and made eye contact with each of his soldiers in turn. They nodded back small, tight movements. The ground rose to meet them. Through the open door, Riley could see a scatter of structures inside a ring of barriers. HESCO walls, concertina wire floodlights, even in daylight. A forward operating base living in that thin space between temporary and permanent. The helicopter touched down with a jolt. Dust and grit exploded upward in a brown cloud. The crew chief slid the door wider and gestured sharply. "Go!" he shouted, his voice making it through her headset as a clipped sound. Riley stepped down onto packed earth that shifted under her weight. The air tasted like diesel and sweat with an undertone of something scorched. The heat wrapped around her shoulders heavier than the morning in Baltimore had been. Cole fell into step beside her, leading her across the landing zone, past pallets of supplies and stacks of water bottles wrapped in plastic. They passed a line of wounded sitting or lying where space had been found for them. Medics moved from body to body, voices low but urgent. "Busy day," Riley said mostly to herself. "Busy month," Cole replied. A tan tent with a red cross sprayed on its side loomed ahead. As they approached, the flap opened and a woman in scrub's hair, pulled back under a bandana, stepped out. She had dark eyes and a face that might have been called pretty if it were not so hard at the edges right now. Riley knew her before her brain supplied the name. "Lena," she said. Staff Sergeant Lena Torres stopped dead as if someone had cut her strings. The chart in her hand dropped to her side. "No way," Torres breathed. "No way." She closed the distance in 3 strides and grabbed Riley by the shoulders, fingers digging in as if to test that she was not an image or a memory. "They told us you wanted out," Torres said. "That you disappearing was your idea." "It was a choice they made for me," Riley answered. A second figure stepped into view behind Torres, wiping his hands on a towel already stained with more than water. Ben Park looked older than he had any right to, lines carved at the corners of his mouth, dark circles under his eyes. "Riley," he said, voice rough. She nodded once. "Park." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course they called you," he said. "Of course they did." Torres released Riley and stepped back, wiping quickly at one eye with the back of her wrist. "He is inside, Torres said. "Holding for now. We are out of tricks." She lifted the tent flap for Riley. Inside, the air felt cooler, the light filtered through tan canvas. Equipment crowded every surface, some of it high-tech, some of it clearly scavenged or improvised. The steady beeping of monitors formed a jagged pattern in the background. On the central table lay Ethan Maddox. He looked both exactly the same and entirely different. The lines in his face had deepened. Gray threaded through his hair. There was a tube in his throat tape at the corners of his mouth lines, running from his arms to bags hung on poles. His eyes were open. They tracked Riley as she approached the movement, slow but focused. She stood at the bedside, staring down at the man whose pulse she had once held between her fingers in another country, in another life. His gaze cleared a fraction. One corner of his mouth twitched around the tube. "You came." He managed the words, half air and half determination. Riley set her duffel on the floor, the strap falling slack. "Looks like I did, Kay," she said. Around them, the monitors continued their uneven songs. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal and the faint, sour note of fear that no cleanser ever fully erased. The heart monitor by Maddox's shoulder skipped in a way Riley did not like. Not enough to set off alarms, just enough that she heard the hesitation in the pattern. "Bring me everything you have on him," she said. Torres handed over a clipboard thick with papers, then tapped the screen of a tablet to wake it up. Park angled a portable ultrasound toward the bed, gel already smeared on the probe. Cables coiled across the floor, an obstacle course of plastic and rubber. Riley scanned the chart first. Initial blast, field stabilization, transport here, fluids, blood, vasopressors, attempts to tap the pericardium recorded in neat military shorthand, attempts to use the protocol she knew too well. "GL7, she murmured. Park heard her. "We tried the whole book," he said. "Nothing holds more than an hour. It shifts. It bleeds. His pressure will not stay up without us chasing it." On the screen, the black and gray of Maddox's chest shifted with each breath. The pericardial sac looked too full, the heart squeezed inside it. A bright shard glinted against the murk, pressing in at a cruel angle. The original injury had been bad. This was worse. Location was everything, and this time the metal had chosen a place that made the old trick into a blunt instrument. Riley watched the image move for a full minute. Each frame etched itself into her mind. Then she shook her head. "If you try GL7 again, you will cut him apart," she said. Park dropped his gaze, his finger stilling on the probe. "We figured," he said. "We just did not know what else to do." Maddox's hand twitched near the side of the table. The tape on his wrist pulled slightly. His eyes found Riley's again. There was a question there that did not need words. She set the tablet down and stepped closer, fingers brushing his forearm, careful not to disturb the lines. "I'm not here to recycle old tricks," she said. "We will find something that fits this." His eyes closed briefly. Relief softened his forehead just for a moment. Cole had slipped in near the flap and stood quietly watching. The other soldiers stayed outside their shadows, moving at the edges of the canvas. Riley turned to Torres. "What have you got for gear?" she asked. "Sharp, blunt energy, anything that burns." Torres rattled off a list. Standard surgical set, one portable cauterizer, old but functioning, limited sutures for cardiovascular work, no bypass capability, no real cardiac pump. "We are lucky to have proper monitors and a vent," Torres finished. Riley looked around the tent. The roof sagged slightly between support poles. Dust clung in thin lines where the fabric met the metal. Every surface was being used twice. She had seen worse. She had also seen far better. There was no point wishing for the latter. "We prep like for a thoracotomy modified," she said. "Minimal opening, minimal time. We drain, we create space around that thing, then we get it out in one motion." "One motion," Park repeated. He scrubbed a hand over his face. "No pressure." The edges of her mouth twitched. "Plenty of pressure," she said. "That is the problem." They moved. Torres directed a corpsman to clear a table for instruments. Someone opened a sterile pack and laid out steel in ordered rows. Park called for blood units and adjusted the ventilator settings. Cole stepped outside to keep the perimeter from crowding in. Riley washed her hands at a basin that had seen too many hurried scrubs. The water ran lukewarm, tinged slightly brown. She pumped soap, rubbed fingers against palms between knuckles under nails. Her hands looked older in the harsh light than she remembered them looking in Baltimore. The scars on her knuckles stood out as pale lines. She dried on thin paper and pulled on gloves. Torres helped her into a gown, tying at the back with quick, practiced motions. "You know," Torres said, voice low near Riley's ear, "I used to tell the newbies stories about you, the mad medic who pulled Maddox out of the ground with a spare tube and a prayer." "I do not pray," Riley said. "That is what I told them," Torres replied. They took their positions around the table. Riley at the chest, Torres opposite Park at the head. A corpsman hovered at the foot with a transfusion line in hand. The tent seemed to narrow around them, the sounds outside blurring into a dull pressure beyond the canvas. "Sedation level?" Riley asked. "He is where we can keep him," Park answered, "low as I dare." Riley nodded. "Too deep and he might not come back. Too shallow and he would feel everything." "Scalpel," she said. Torres placed the handle in her palm, firm and certain. The weight was familiar. Riley steadied her breath and made the first incision clean and decisive, following a line she had drawn in her head since she saw the scan. There was no time for gentle. There was also no room for clumsy. She cut through layers, spread them, revealing structures that had their own color, their own sheen. The smell of cauterized flesh and antiseptic mingled in the air. Maddox's chest rose and fell under her hands, the ventilator whooshing softly in time with the beeps of the monitor. The pericardium bulged, a pale sac under pressure. "Pericardial window," she said, "careful." She opened a small section. Fluid spilled out, dark and thin. The monitor responded almost immediately, heart rate easing a fraction. "He likes that," Park said. "Do not get attached to him liking things yet," Riley answered. She worked to widen the window just enough to allow access not so wide that structures shifted more than they already had. Her fingers moved with a precision that came from repetition in other bodies under other circumstances. When she finally saw the edge of the metal, it flashed a dull silver point in a field of red and pink. "There you are," she breathed. The shard lay against the outer wall of the heart, pressed so tightly that every contraction made muscles slide along its edge. It reminded her of a stone caught under a tire, ready to shred rubber if it moved wrong. If she pulled it as it was, it would tear through tissue and open a hole she could not close in this environment. She needed a way to separate the two, to interpose something between metal and muscle without losing grip. Her mind ran through materials. They did not have mesh. They did not have the newer patch kits that larger facilities kept for emergencies. They had gauze, standard, and hemostatic, and her own capacity to place it exactly where it needed to go. "Lena," she said. "Yeah." "Heavy combat gauze," Riley ordered. 3 packs, the good stuff you hide when people say they are short. Torres blinked, then snapped a command to the corpsman. Moments later, 3 vacuum-sealed packets slapped down on the tray. Riley tore one open with the heel of her hand, keeping the field as clean as she could. The gauze inside was thick, impregnated with agents that helped blood clot. It was meant to pack wounds, to plug leaks, not to cradle metal next to a beating heart. She wove a strip into a narrow band, rolling it between her fingers until it formed a small rope. She rolled another slightly thinner. Her glove stuck faintly to the fibers. Park watched her hands. "What are you building?" he asked. "A cushion," she said. She fed the first strip through the window, using a blunt instrument to guide it. Slowly, carefully, she worked it between the shard and the heart wall, easing it into the space where fluid had been. The gauze compressed and held, creating a barrier that flexed with each beat. "Pressure?" she asked. "Stable for now," Park replied. "Good. Second strip." The second piece went in alongside the first, reinforcing the buffer. The shard now lay against something that could move without tearing. The heart slid against the gauze rather than the raw edge. "Okay," Riley said. "This is the part I need you all present for." Torres's gaze sharpened. "I am here," she said. Park adjusted his grip on the endotracheal tube, keeping Maddox's head steady. "Ready when you are," he said. Riley studied the angle of the shard one more time. She envisioned the trajectory in reverse, the path it must have taken to lodge where it was. Then she matched her plan to that line. "On my mark," she said quietly. "We will do this in one movement, no hesitation. If his rhythm stumbles, you tell me." Her fingers closed around the exposed portion of the metal with a pair of forceps. The tool felt less like an extension of her hand and more like a translation of intent into metal. 3, she said. 2. The tent seemed to hold its breath. 1. She pulled. The shard slid. The gauze held, guiding it along the narrow tunnel she had created. There was resistance enough that she had to increase pressure, but not the terrifying give of tissue tearing open. A thin line of fresh blood welled up. The monitor hiccuped, then steadied. "Rhythm holding for," Park called. His voice sounded higher than usual. The metal emerged, dripping into the light. The forceps shook just briefly in her hand as the stored tension ran out through her muscles. Torres let out a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "Got you," she whispered. Riley set the shard into a shallow dish on the tray. It lay there inert and ugly, so small for something that had taken up so much space in the day. She bent back to her work. There was no time to stare at trophies. The field still needed to be cleaned, small bleeders sealed, layers closed. She packed more gauze around where the shard had been, not too tight, just enough to support. She checked the pericardial sac for leaks and watched the heart move freely. It was beautiful in its simple, relentless motion. "Pressure climbing," Park reported. "Numbers look almost friendly." "Keep flirting with friendly," Riley said. "I want them to be on speaking terms before we call this done." She closed the pericardial window as much as she dared, leaving space for swelling. She reapproximated muscle, fascia, skin, each layer a barrier and a promise. By the time she tied the last suture, the room felt different. The air seemed lighter, though it could have been her own lungs finally filling more deeply. Her shoulders ached. A trickle of sweat slid down between her shoulder blades. "Vent is holding steady," Park said. "Rhythm is good. He is not fighting the tube." Riley stepped back from the table. The world swayed a little at the edges of her vision. She pulled off her gloves, the snap of latex loud in her ears. The tent was very quiet for a heartbeat. Then noise surged back in. Equipment sounds, people moving, Torres telling someone to start documenting every detail, a corpsman exhaling a curse under his breath that sounded grateful. Cole approached the table, careful to stay clear of the sterile field. He looked at Maddox, then at Riley. "Whatever that was," he said, "it is going in the manual." "Write it down exactly," Torres said. "Do not let them smooth the edges this time." Cole nodded slowly. "What do we call it?" he asked. Park wiped his face with his sleeve, leaving a smear of something on his cheek that he did not seem to notice. GLA Puma? Isa Samiki suggested a weak dimum urum. Riley's gaze slid to the dish on the tray. The shard rested there dull now that it was out of blood. Her own hands, stripped of gloves, showed faint indentations where the forceps had pressed into her skin. "We are done with codes," she said. She looked up at Cole. "You want a name you can put in that manual?" she asked. He held her eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Call it the Kane method," she said. "Spell it right." Torres's mouth curved. Park let out a breath that turned into another short laugh. Cole nodded once. "Yes, ma'am," he repeated. The tent filled with movement again, purposeful and quick. Someone covered Maddox's chest with a clean drape. Another adjusted the IV rate. Park started dictating notes into a recorder, his voice already sliding into the measured rhythm of a report. Riley stepped back to the edge of the tent, reached up and pulled off her cap. Her hair fell in damp strands around her face. She ran her fingers through it, then let her hands drop to her sides. Outside, the rotors of some other aircraft turned somewhere on the base, the sound reaching them as a distant churning thrum. Inside, for the first time since she had walked into St. Gabriel at the end of her last night shift, Riley felt a small, steady place open in her chest. It was not relief. Relief could be taken away by one bad lab result, one late bleed. It was something quieter, anchored in the way her hands still remembered what to do when there were no instructions that fit. 3 days later, Riley stepped off another aircraft into cool, damp air that smelled like rain and jet fuel instead of dust and diesel. The tarmac belonged to a base outside Washington, a strip of gray concrete threaded with yellow lines. The sky above it was low and overcast clouds pressed flat. Her boots hit the ground with a hollow thud that felt unfamiliar after the packed earth of the forward base. A sergeant waited at the bottom of the ramp, cap tucked under one arm, clipboard in hand. He checked her name against a list, thanked her in a formal tone that did not quite match his young face, and guided her toward a dark SUV idling near the edge of the flight line. The ride blurred past. Highway signs, concrete barriers. The low drone of talk radio in the front seat turned down so low it was only a murmur. Riley sat in the back, a lone duffel, on the seat beside her, fingers resting lightly on the engraved bell of her stethoscope through the fabric. They did not take her to a hospital. The building that rose in front of them belonged to a different world. Glass, steel, and stone-guarded entrances, layers of security. The lobby was wide and bright, the air smelling faintly of polished metal and coffee from a kiosk tucked into one corner. People in suits walked briskly across the marble floor, badges clipped to their lapels. She surrendered her phone at the first checkpoint, her bag at the second. A laminated visitor pass was clipped to her collar, hanging next to the St. Gabriel badge she had forgotten to remove. The two pieces of plastic bumped against each other when she moved. An officer in dress uniform appeared from a bank of elevators, his own badge identifying him as Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. He had the contained posture of someone used to moving through these halls. "Ms. Kane," he said, "if you would come with me." They rode up in near silence, the floor numbers blinking by. When the doors opened, the air felt different, quieter, more controlled. Carpeting muffled footsteps. The walls were lined with framed photographs of ceremonies and handshakes. Hayes stopped in front of a double-doored dark wood with no markings. He opened it and stepped aside. The room inside was a conference space made for decisions that affected more than one person at a time. A long table of polished wood dominated the center, ringed by high-backed chairs. At the far end, a large screen glowed with a muted map. Smaller screens along one wall showed other rooms. Other faces, people joining from behind their own secure doors. Several officers already sat at the table, stars and stripes on their shoulders, rectangles of service ribbons on their chests. A few civilians in suits occupied chairs farther down, their expressions guarded. At the head of the table stood a man whose hair had gone almost entirely silver. General Harper had one of those faces that had been weathered by sun and sleepless nights rather than soft office lighting. His uniform fit as if it had grown there. He waited until the door clicked shut behind Riley, then spoke. "Ms. Kane," he said, "thank you for coming." She did not sit until he gestured toward a chair halfway down the table. The fabric cushion felt too soft under her. Harper remained standing. "You served in Helmand Province 8 years ago," he said. "You were part of an operation designated Glasslight." He said the word without flinching. Hearing it spoken aloud in a room like this felt strange. During that operation, you performed an improvised field procedure on Colonel Ethan Maddox that allowed him to survive injuries that should have killed him. Harper's gaze did not leave her face. Your report on that procedure was submitted through your chain of command. He paused, and a slight tension pulled at the corners of his mouth. It was then buried, he said. Good boy, he said. A murmur quickly suppressed ran along the civilian side of the table. Decisions were made at the time to classify not only the mission, but the failures that surrounded it, Harper continued. In doing so, the innovation you provided was stripped of your name and attributed elsewhere. He nodded toward one of the screens mounted on the wall. It shifted, displaying a title slide. Kane Method. It read in bold letters. Underneath, smaller text scrolled, Field Cardiac Rescue Protocol Multi-Theater Application. Riley felt something shift inside her, a small dislocation. Seeing her name there on that surface in that font was both right and slightly unreal. The slide changed again, revealing a graph. The line started low, then climbed. Each point was labeled with a number and a location. These are documented cases in which the method based on your original report was used successfully, Harper said. 253 as of last week across 4 operational theaters. The number landed like a weight, not crushing but undeniable. Harper's voice lost some of its formal distance. That is 253 people who were not sent home under a folded flag, he said. We should have told you sooner. He let that sit, the admission filling the space between them. When Colonel Maddox was injured again, Harper went on, he requested you by name. There were those who said this was not feasible, he insisted. Sergeant Cole and his team were sent to locate you. There was a brief flash on one of the side screens. A grainy shot from a body camera, Riley in hospital scrubs in the St. Gabriel hallway, eyes wide but steady. You responded, Harper said. You improvised again in conditions that were less than ideal. Our medical review board has gone over the recordings. They are assigning your most recent procedure its own designation, but this time the attribution will not be in question. He glanced around the table as if daring anyone to disagree. Harper sat at last, the leather of his chair creaking softly. On behalf of the United States military, he said, I offer you an apology. It is late, it is inadequate, it is also sincere. The room stayed quiet. Riley listened to the faint hum of air conditioning and the distant rumble of something in the building's guts. A part of her wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to stand up and walk out. Both impulses stayed in place. What happens now? She asked instead. Harper exchanged a look with a woman in a dark suit near his end of the table. She gave the smallest of nods. We are offering you reinstatement, Harper said. Rank of captain, retroactive pay adjusted for time and position, a role within the Joint Medical Command as Director of Field Medical Innovation. You would oversee training protocol development and field research. The list came out smooth, clearly rehearsed. There were numbers behind it, budgets, office space, staff, a life. It would give you authority, the woman in the suit added, to make sure procedures like yours are recognized, tested, properly implemented correctly. Authority, recognition. The words floated in the air, shiny and neat. Before Riley could decide what to do with them, another voice spoke up from down the table. Ms. Kane. The tone snagged her attention in a different way. She knew that cadence. She had heard it used to announce disciplinary actions and to promote fundraising campaigns. Director Leonard Holt stood from a chair near the far end of the table. In this room, without his desk behind him, he seemed smaller. His tie was knotted a little too tight. There was a sheen at his hairline that had nothing to do with heat. I do not think we were properly introduced earlier, he said. Leonard Holt, medical director at St. Gabriel. She looked at him and did not speak. He cleared his throat. We only received word yesterday, he said. About your service record, about the Kane method. We had no idea. He smiled, but it sat wrong on his face. I want to say personally and on behalf of the hospital how grateful we are, he continued. Your interventions both there and here are extraordinary. The word extraordinary landed without weight. Holt took a breath, then pushed forward. I would like to extend an offer, he said, to reinstate you at St. Gabriel not just as a staff nurse, but as head of emergency services. Full administrative authority over protocols and training in the department. We are prepared to provide resources to support whatever initiatives you deem necessary. He said provide resources, like a person talking about a grant, not a person talking about lives. Riley watched his hands as he spoke. They fidgeted with a pen thumb rolling along the clip fingers tightening when he mentioned reinstatement. 3 days ago, she said, you called me a liability. Color rose high on his cheeks. I was not aware of the full context of your skills, he said. You were aware a woman was alive, Riley replied. You were aware she walked out instead of being wheeled to the morgue. That is not the point, he began. It was the only point that mattered to me, Riley said. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The room had gone still. You did not ask how I knew what I knew, she said. You did not ask what I had seen. You made a decision based on paperwork, not patience. Holt looked around as if hoping someone might step in. No one did. Now you know other people think I am useful, Riley said. Now you want to put my name on a door. She did not say his. She did not need to. Holt's fingers tightened around the pen until his knuckles blanched. For a second she thought it might snap. We regret the earlier misunderstanding, he said. The words sounded dragged out of him. Riley turned back to Harper. Thank you for the apology, she said, and for telling me what happened to that report. He inclined his head. And the offer, he asked. She looked at the screen again at the graph with its rising line. At the title with her name. At the small text under it referencing training modules and deployment kits. If I take that position, she said slowly, who do I speak for? Harper considered. Officially, he said, for the command. And unofficially, for the medics you train, he answered. There it was, the narrow path inside the larger machine. Riley thought of Torres and Park in the tent moving with her almost before she asked. She thought of the unnamed medics who had used the first version of her improvised procedure without knowing where it came from. She thought of nurses in civilian hospitals standing in fluorescent light with their hands on the edge of beds, feeling the moment decision turned into action. There are more of them, she said. Out there. People who know more than their job titles admit, who will never sit at this table, who will be written up for doing what I did. Part of what we are offering, the woman in the suit put in, is the chance to fix that. Riley shook her head. I do not think I can fix it from in here, she said. Silence again, the kind that has weight, not emptiness. You are turning us down, Harper said. His tone held no anger, only confirmation. I am, she said. May I ask why he he said. She let her hands rest on the table palms, flat fingers spread. The wood felt smooth and cool under her skin, because the people I am most interested in reaching are the ones whose names do not make it onto these screens, she said. If I sit in this chair, I become part of what they have to work around. Harper studied her for a long moment. His eyes had the distant focus of someone recalibrating. What will you do instead, he asked. I can teach, she said. I can build a place that belongs to them. Medics, nurses, paramedics, rural doctors, the ones who stand in rooms without backup and have to decide whether they trust what their hands are telling them. A corner of Harper's mouth lifted. You will need support, he said. I will need students, she replied. You will have them, he said. He glanced at Hayes. Make sure she gets whatever non-classified material she requires on current training gaps. Holt sat down heavily, the pen still in his hand. He looked smaller than he had when she was on the other side of his desk in Baltimore. The meeting moved on to details that did not require her. Funding channels, contact points, policy implications. Riley sat and listened until someone slid a folder in front of her with documents to sign that acknowledged what had happened to Glasslight to her report to the procedure now bearing her name. When it was done, Harper stood. Whatever patch you wear or do not wear, he said to her quietly away from the microphones and the screens. You saved my people. Twice. That matters. She met his eyes. It mattered to me too, she said. Outside the air smelled different again. Less like sealed systems, more like trees from somewhere beyond the parking lot. The sky had started to clear in patches blue showing through. Riley walked across the pavement with her duffel on her shoulder, the visitor badge still clipped to her collar, the St. Gabriel badge beside it. The plastic rectangles knocked together with each step, then settled as she reached up and unclipped both. She held them in her hand for a second, then slipped them into her pocket. A car waited to take her back into the city. She opened the door, slid inside, and let it carry her away from the building of glass and steel mind already sifting through what she would need and who she would call when it was time to start turning ideas into a place where other hands could learn to trust themselves. 6 months later, the building did not look like much from the street. It sat on a corner in a part of Denver where warehouses had slowly turned into offices and studios. Red brick 3-story windows that had seen better weather. The only thing that marked it as different was a new sign by the front door, the paint still bright. Kane Institute for Frontline Medicine. Riley paused on the sidewalk to look at it. Her reflection sat faintly in the glass of the door, layered over the letters. She could hear the low hum of voices inside, a murmur threaded with the clink of chairs being moved and the shuffle of paper. She pushed the door open and stepped into the entryway. The air held a mix of fresh paint and coffee undercut by something more familiar. Alcohol wipes, rubber, a faint hint of metal from the equipment they had hauled in piece by piece. To the right, a bulletin board carried flyers for upcoming sessions, copies of field protocol summaries, and a growing cluster of photos of people in uniforms and scrubs. Some had sent their pictures in from other countries, their faces grinning in front of tents, ambulances, small rural clinics. Directly across from the door, mounted on the wall above a simple bench, hung a framed patch. A wraith in motion, 7 stars arched overhead. Under it, on a small brass plate, someone had engraved, "Ghost Lance, 7, in honor of the ones who were not in the reports." Riley let her hand rest for a moment on the frame. The glass felt cool under her palm. Then she turned toward the muffled noise coming from the auditorium. The room had once been a loading bay. Now it held 200 folding chairs arranged in staggered rows. Almost all of them were filled. Uniforms of different colors broke up the sea of faces. Army combat patterns next to navy blue paramedic polos, next to green scrubs and white coats. A few wore no uniform at all, just jeans and shirts, hospital badges clipped to their pockets. Conversations quieted when Riley stepped up onto the low platform at the front. The projector cast light on the screen behind her, a frozen image of a heart on ultrasound, its movements captured in gray. "Good morning," she said. The microphone on the stand carried her voice to the back without forcing her to raise it. "You know why you are here," she went on. "You have all stood in rooms where something was going wrong faster than the page could go out. You have watched monitors climb the wrong way, seen blood-filling spaces it should not be in, heard breathing that told you the book was not enough." A few heads nodded. A paramedic in the third row stared at his hands, turning a pen over between his fingers. A young nurse near the aisle leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I'm not here to teach you to break rules," Riley said. "I'm here to teach you what your hands and your eyes can tell you when there is no time to look up what someone else wrote." She nodded to the tech at the back. The image on the screen shifted. A clip from the forward operating base filled the wall. The camera angle showed a narrow slice of the tent, enough to see Maddox's chest, the open field, Riley's gloved hands moving with deliberate speed. There was no sound from the original recording, only her voice now. "This is the second time I met Colonel Ethan Maddox," she said. "What you are seeing is the first use of what they now call the Kane method. At the time, it was a problem that did not fit anything I had been given." She walked them through each step, not as a list, but as a series of decisions. Where her fingers went and why, what the monitor showed and how that changed the plan, when she chose to move and when she forced herself to wait one more beat. She pointed out her own hesitation at one point, the fraction of a second where the shard caught and she had to decide to pull harder or stop. "You will have moments like this," she said. "You have probably already had them. The difference between guessing and knowing is practice and attention." Later, during a break, they swarmed her in small clusters, questions layered over each other. What do you document when you do something that is not in the protocol? How do you get your attending to listen when you see it and they do not? How do you sleep after the ones you do not save? Riley answered as best she could. Sometimes with techniques and phrases they could try. Sometimes with the simple admission that there was no trick, only learning to live with the weight and not let it stop your hands the next time. By late afternoon, the chairs emptied, footsteps echoing down the hallway as people left in ones and twos, talking in low voices about cases they had seen, things they might do differently. Riley returned to the small office at the back of the building that she had claimed for herself. It held a desk covered in papers, 2 filing cabinets that already looked too full, and a window that overlooked the alley. Sunlight angled and catching dust motes in a slow dance. There was a stack of mail waiting in the center of the desk. Most of it was mundane: invoices, course registration forms. A handwritten envelope among the printed ones caught her eye. The return address carried a base name she recognized. The handwriting was blocky and careful. She opened it. "Riley. They tell me I'm being retired whether I like it or not. 28 years of service, apparently that is enough. You already know the parts of my record that matter. I hear you have decided to spend your time teaching people how to keep stubborn old officers breathing. If you have room for one more instructor who has learned what it feels like on the table and not just beside it, I would like to help. I still owe you. E. Maddox." She read it twice, then set the paper down where the sunlight hit it, the ink dark against the white. She pulled a sheet from the tray and picked up a pen. Her hand moved easily. "Maddox. We start new cohorts in 2 weeks. Bring your stories, bring your scars. There is a seat at the front for you. Kane." She folded the letter, slid it into an envelope, and added it to the outgoing stack. As she stepped into the corridor to leave for the night, a distant thrum reached her ears. A helicopter somewhere over the city heading toward the mountains or back toward the airport. The sound threaded through the building, faint but clear. Riley paused by the front door. For a long time in her life, that sound had meant incoming harm or outgoing hope. Now it was simply another part of the city. Her hand closed around the door handle. The metal was warm from the day's sun. She opened it and walked out into the cooling evening. The noise of the rotors fading into the wider hum of traffic and voices and all the small, ordinary sounds of people who would never know her name, but who might one day be held in the hands of someone who had learned here how to act when the book ran out. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.